성자와 성령의 이름으로 아멘. 우리 주 예수 그리스도의 은총과 하나님의 사랑과 성령의 진교가 여러분과 함께 안녕하십니까. 바쁘신데 가운데도 많이 와주셔서 대단히 고맙습니다. 여러분께서 잘 아시는 바와 같이 우리는 오늘 우리 친구이신 개된 어르신분의 장례미사를 드리기 위한 것입니다. 따라서 그의 생애를 위해서 주님께 감사드리고, 그리고 우리를 여기 남아있는 사람들 서로 위로도 해주고, 그리고 여러 가지로 그의 하신 일을 생각하는 것입니다. 잠시 주님 앞에 우리 잘못된 것을 뉘우치고 이 거룩한 미사를 올립시다.
철필과 나무로 바위에다 영원히 새겨주었으면, 그러나 나는 알고 있다네 나의 구원자께서 살아계심을.
After the Sabbath, and towards dawn on the first day of the week, Mary of Magdala and the other Mary went to visit the sepulchre. I think the last time I was in this room with Kevin was for the memorial mass for Michael McCarthy, which Kevin celebrated and at which he gave the homily. Kevin and Michael and I, in our time, I think, became something of an unholy trinity. We arrived in Korea a year apart. Kevin came first, and the following year Michael, and then I was third, I think, the year after. Our first appointments separated us widely. Kevin went to Chuncheon, Michael went south to Gwangju, and I went to Wonju. So for the first few years our paths didn't cross, and we didn't get to know one another. But finally, around the 1980s, we coalesced in Seoul. And coming here on a Monday evening, somehow or other we seem to, not every Monday, but regularly, we seem to stay on in the common room there after everybody else had gone home, and indulged in dialogue, discussions, theology, politics, sociology, didn't matter, a whole range of subjects upon which generally we agreed to disagree, all the time very politely and intellectually, but without any emotional involvement. It was a time when we came to agree, it was a time of great change. I suppose that's been true of every age. But after the Second World War, after the Korean War, the Columbans in Korea had got into a way of doing mission, and it tended to be very much based on parish building, parish administration. But with especially when Vatican II came along and suggested that the church was not quite as concrete as everybody had assumed for a long time, but there was need for some changes to adapt to the times. And the times themselves were changing. So, bit by bit, I remember Hub Hayward, who was one of the elders of the Columban community here when I came. He defined the Columbans as a group of flexible opportunists with the mind of the church. Now, in Hub's day, I have no problem with the first part. It's the second part that gets a little bit tricky. In Hub's day, I suspect it was quite easy. But these days, when you see the poor old Pope Francis being criticised loudly by Cardinal Burke yet again, and Cardinal Burke yet again going public with his disagreement, you wonder if they can't agree on the mind of the church at that level, how are the rest of us supposed to know quite what it is? But a group of flexible opportunists, perhaps we always were. And now, especially from the mid-1960s on, it became obvious for a lot of reasons that it was time to start moving away from the model of mission as parish priest somewhere else. But there were many ways of being on mission. And Kevin was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first to realize this and realize immersion in the culture of the country, understanding more deeply the culture of the country in order to dialogue with the people of the country, people of the culture, was an important part of mission. Again, one of the earlier ones to make this realization was P.J. McGlinchey, in charge of probably the first one to move away from a totally parish-centered model of mission. After my first term here in Korea, when I went home in 1970, I called into the Australian headquarters in Essendon, and one of the first questions I got from an elderly priest living there was, "This fellow McGlinchey, does he say Mass?" The impression was that all he did was feed pigs all day long. Somehow or other, this was what newfangled missionaries were all about. But for many, perhaps of the older generation, the move away from parish and into a whole plethora of other ways of being on mission was a stumbling block for them, for some of them, difficult for some of them to accept. And so there were turbulent times then when Kevin first made that break. But he was one who was able to show that there are many ways of being on mission, and all of them are equally valid. We are a group of flexible opportunists. There's no two of us alike, exactly. Nor are we exactly alike in the way we go about mission, either here or anywhere else in the world. I think it has been one of our blessings. And Kevin, I think we should be grateful to him for being one of the leaders in that here in Korea, as now at stage all these years later, we actually only have one Colombian parish left. And yet, we are still all on mission, each in his or her own way. Kevin, in the field that he chose to concentrate on, was brought everything to it. I remember some of our, not arguments, but discussions late at night. Kevin was obviously involved in some kind of translation work. And he'd have 2 or 3 English words of very similar meaning. And he thought me, what exactly these 3 mean? How are they different? Obviously he was trying to fit which would be the exact right word to explain the Korean word that he wanted to translate. He was well known, and quite rightly, for his expertise in this field of translation, his understanding of Korean literature, its importance in the culture, and in coming to this as a Catholic Colombian missionary. He left behind, and especially I'm sure among all the students he taught over the years, this spirit of the gospel, which, whether we like it or not, when we meet people, we do leave behind that impression, for better or for worse, but hopefully in Colombian mission case, it's generally for the better. We've all had the experience of meeting people decades after perhaps we knew them in a parish, perhaps baptized them, perhaps married them, something, having not met them for 30 or 40 years, and suddenly they appear, and they're all over you, they remember you, everything about you, when your birthday is, that, and it comes as a shock to think that I made that deep an impression on those people. Well, Kevin certainly did, left a great impression. He was a great Colombian ambassador here in Korea to walk, and I'm very grateful to him for showing us that there are many ways of being on mission. Kevin, thank you. Rest now with God until we meet again.
오늘 무엇보다 영시를 가르쳐 주신 우리의 스승 케빈 노록 신부님의 제자들로 이 자리에 와 있습니다. 먼저 저희가 얼마나 많은 사랑을 신부님으로부터 받았는지 그 이야기를 드리고 싶습니다. 신부님의 마지막 10여 년이 온통 저희가 사랑을 독차지한 게 아닌가 하는 생각이 들 정도였습니다. 성골롬반외에서 하는 영시 수업 강좌는 2008년 가을 학기에 신부님이 개설해서 시작되었습니다. 그 이후 11년 계속되었고 지난 가을 갑자기 신부님 쓰러지시기 전까지 신부님은 매년 2학기 한 번도 걸리지 않고 우리에게 영시를 가르쳐 주셨습니다. 2008년 첫 학기 수강생인 저는 신부님께서 하신 이 말씀이 기억이 나요. 그때 경희대에서 정년퇴직하시고 몇 년 지나지 않아서 수업을 시작하셨는데 이렇게 말씀하셨어요. 이제 시험이나 성적 그런 거 신경 안 쓰는 학생들을 가르치게 되어서 아주 기쁘다. 그랬는데 사실 그 기쁨이 오래가지 못했어요. 왜냐하면 우리 아주머니들이 너무 답답했거든요. 그래서 그 신부님께서 그 가르쳐 주시는 그 말귀를 못 알아듣는 저희를 보시고 답답해하던 그 표정이 아직도 눈에 선합니다. 근데 그 얼마지 않아서 신부님께서 점점 더 얼굴에 이렇게 미소를 되찾기 시작하셨어요. 신부님의 수업이 주요했던 거죠. 신부님은 이렇게 말씀하셨어요. 영시를 시를 읽는 그 가장 큰 목적은 자기 자신을 알기 위해서다. 그것을 항상 명심해라. 그리고 우리가 판에 박힌 대답을 하거나 또 뻔한 그 어떤 배운 그런 대답을 하면 고개를 갸우뚱하시면서 다시 한번 생각해 보길 권하셨죠. 아까 처음에 여기 들어갈 때 보였던 아리랑 TV에서 하셨던 인터뷰에 보면 그걸 마치고 해주신 말씀이 기억이 나요. 그게 여기 방송되지는 않은 것 같은데 그때 그 인터뷰가 영시 수업은 얼마나 누가 받으시나요? 물었을 때 우리 많은 그 부인들이 위험을 무릅쓰고 내 수업을 받고 있다. 그렇게 대답을 하셨대요. 그러니까 위험을 무릅쓰고라고 하셨는데 그 사람이 제대로 그 캐치를 못했다고 안타까워하셨는데 저희는 그걸 듣고 웃었어요. 신부님께서 우리가 위험을 무릅쓰고 시를 배우고 있다는 사실을 시는 기존의 편견이나 선입관 또는 고정된 관념들을 타파하라는 거였죠. 신부님 항상 저희한테 그걸 강조하셨어요. 그리고 우리의 생각이나 이런 것들이 많은 변화를 가져오기를 원했죠. 그래서 시 안에서 여러분이 정말 봐야 되는 게 뭔지를 항상 가르쳐 주시고자 했어요. 특히 말씀하셨어요. 하느님이 지어주신 이 세상에 숨어있는 온갖 아름다움들을 여러분은 놓치지 말아야 한다. 그 아름다움은 시를 통해서 알 수가 있다. 우리가 시를 보는 그 목적은 하느님이 만들어주신 그 아름다움을 잘 캐치하고 그걸 잘 감사할 수 있도록 그렇게 하는 능력을 키우는 거다. 그런 말씀을 해주셨어요. 다행히 이 시간이 지날수록 요즘 작년까지 영시 수업은 너무 활발해서 이제는 의견을 말하려면 손을 들고 순서를 기다려야 했을 정도로 우리는 활발한 학생이 되었어요. 케빈 노록 신부님은 1964년에 이 땅에 오셨죠. 63년 12월이라고 하셨는데 아마 미션 명을 그렇게 받으신 걸로 이해합니다. 하느님께서 세상 끝까지 말씀을 전하라고 명하신 선교사제 임무를 띠고 이 땅에 오셨는데요. 오랫동안 시를 가르쳐 주셨어요. 그리고 1년간 고생하시다가 지난주에 하느님 품으로 돌아갔습니다. 저는 케빈 노록 신부님이 당신의 소명을 다하고 돌아가셨다고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면 척박한 우리 가슴에 내려앉은 말씀의 씨앗이 신부님의 영시 수업이라는 단비를 맞으면서 사랑과 아름다움에 대한 인식이라는 그 열매를 맺게 해주셨어요. 그러니까 신부님은 하느님의 큰 품 안에 충분히 안으실 거예요. 저는 신부님 없이 이제 시를 읽어야 하지만 신부님의 기억을 통해서 항상 신부님이 있지 않을 거예요. 우리 모든 영시반원들은 아주 오랫동안 아마 영원히 케빈 노록 신부님을 기억할 겁니다. 감사합니다.
All weekend from Saturday, when I told colleagues who have served, many of you who have known, who had the honour also of serving in Seoul, about Kevin's passing, so many messages of goodwill. Eamon McKee, who many of you remember as ambassador here, spoke of Kevin as a Renaissance man, as he said in the best sense of the term, a great mind, an active life, and a great heart. It was during Eamon's time that the embassy library, in the presence of Minister Bat O'Keefe, was named after Kevin. Angela O'Donoghue, Ruth Parkin, Peter Ryan, David Murphy, colleagues and friends whom you'll all know, all emailed spontaneously, wanting to remember and be associated with the remembrance of Kevin. Many of you will remember Richard Ryan, also a poet, who was our first ambassador, who opened the embassy in 1989. And Richard emailed me, and he reminded me of Kevin's anthology, Tilting the Jar, Spilling the Moon. And as Richard also said, that Kevin illuminated early Chosun era Korean poetry, but also contemporary poets like Cho Byung-hwa and So Jung-ju, as Richard Ryan put it, wonderfully served by Kevin's skills. And on a personal level, I have to say, the first time actually I was in this hall was for St. Patrick's Day 2018, when Sean Keneally organised a reception, and Kevin was in the audience, and I thought I'd just say a few words of Korean at the beginning, and it's a little intimidating, of course, and so many fine linguists here today. And Kevin afterwards came up to me and said, "Oh, that's great, a few expressions, that's all you need, that'll get you through." And I remember thinking how extraordinary that this intellectual titan, as we all remember, the first, because everyone remembers that the first foreigner to have been granted a PhD in Korean literature in Korea, winner of the National Literature Prize, most recently the Daesan Prize for Translation, presidential honours, that this intellectual titan would also be so warm, so modest, so good-humoured, and really so human. An Irish heart and a Korean heart, an Irish soul and a Korean soul. I have the honour, the sad honour of being the last Irish ambassador to have known Kevin personally. But his reputation will live on. I think that for years people will always think of Kevin as, I know of course, and everyone here is also very, very closely involved in Kevin's spiritual life. But also, of course, people will remember him as someone who really opened up Korean literature, not just to Ireland, but to the wider world. As a representative of the Irish community, a representative of the Irish government, it is a matter of the most extraordinary pride, the singular honour that he has brought to Ireland in the name of literature, something which, as we all know, we prize so highly in Ireland. But on a human level, what an honour, but also what a pleasure, what a great pleasure to have known Kevin the man. Really, really wonderful man, and I was really so struck this weekend, just the spontaneous messages from former colleagues who have served here, who had their own remembrances of Richard, of Kevin O'Rourke. From Richard Ryan in the late 1980s, and long nights of discussing literature, to more recent colleagues like Angle and David Murphy. I'm honoured to have known him, and let me express to you all, who, as I said, family, friends, brothers, my condolences, and finally, just that sense of great honour to have known Kevin O'Rourke. Thank you.
As a missionary, it's never easy to span two countries. And I think it's more difficult to immerse yourself in two cultures. I think many of us have tried and at times been found wanting. Others have tried and they've got lost in limbo between the two countries. In Kevin's case, I think we saw a man who had the ability to span not only two countries, but also to immerse himself in two cultures. And I think more than just immersing himself in the cultures and intellectually understanding them, the thing that struck me about Kevin was that he was at home in them. He was at home in an Irish culture. He was at home in Korea. And I think to go further, not only as a missionary, as a man, I didn't know Kevin very well, but in the last few years, or before he became ill, I knew him a little bit better. And one of the things that struck me was that Kevin was a man at home in life. Wasn't just at home in cultures, wasn't just at home in countries. He was at home in life. There was a contentedness about the way he lived life. You got the impression that this man was happy with his lot and contented. I was flicking through some of his books to try and get an impressive passage to finish up with, a poem perhaps, or maybe an interpretation of a poem. And I actually came across a paragraph in this book here. And for me, it summed up Kevin as a man. And I'd like just to finish with this short paragraph. It's not one of his intellectual paragraphs, or it's not one of his poetic ones. It's one about himself. Korea is home to me. When I go to Rosslare in Ireland, I'm on my holidays. I arrive with a contented grin. When I get back to Incheon Airport, I'm home. I heave a contented sigh and look forward to the pleasures of living in my sole apartment again after months of being pampered by my family in Ireland. So I think just to say Kevin was at home in life, and we pray today that he's at home in the arms of the Lord.
주님께서 여러분과 함께 전하신 전주 성부와 성자와 성령께서는 여기 모인 모든 이에게 강복하소서. 아멘. 미사가 끝났으니 가서 복음을 전합시다. 아멘. 감사합니다.
Oh